Hidden behind steel doors lie the greatest stories the auto world forgot. From factory wars to near-death legends, this is Vaulted Wheels, unlocking the machines that built America.
Okay, picture this. It is the summer of 1940. Paris has fallen, the Nazi blitzkrieg has just rolled over France, and the German war machine is actively commandeering the country's vast manufacturing might to fuel its own fanatical conquest. But in the factories of one of France's largest automakers, there is this silent, totally invisible rebellion brewing. It's a high-stakes, literal life-or-death drama where a car company fights the Nazis without firing a single shot. So what we're talking about today isn't just a story about cars. It's a massive cinematic saga of brilliant engineering, devastating financial ruin, and just sheer stubborn human defiance.
So, the Nazis roll in and take over the Citroën factory, right? And they immediately order the company to start building these T-45 heavy-loading trucks for the Wehrmacht. But Citroën's president, a man named Pierre-Jules Boulanger, absolutely refuses to just comply. Instead, he organizes a brilliant campaign of secret sabotage. First, he instructs all his factory workers to implement a very strict go-slow policy. But, just slowing down wasn't enough. Boulanger needed these trucks to actually fail, and he needed them to fail when it hurt the enemy the most, out on the front lines. So the big question was, how exactly do you sabotage a military truck right under the noses of the Gestapo without getting your own engineers lined up against a wall and shot?
The answer they came up with was beautifully, devastatingly simple. The workers just subtly moved the full-line notch on the engine's oil dipsticks a little bit lower down. That's it. When the Nazi mechanics checked the oil, it looked totally full. But in reality, the engines were being completely starved. These trucks would run perfectly fine just long enough to pass inspection, get loaded up, and be deployed into active combat. But once they were out on the battlefield under heavy load, the engines would unknowingly run out of oil and just completely seize up, completely baffling the enemy. It was a masterstroke of engineering, quietly weaponized against the oppressors. Welcome to this explainer. Because to understand how a company cultivated this kind of audacious, out-of-the-box thinking, we really have to rewind back to its very beginning.
Section 1. The Double Chevron Visionary.
Let's introduce our main protagonist, André Gustave Citroën. Born in Paris to a wealthy family of diamond merchants, André was this incredibly ambitious radical who repeatedly, throughout his life, gambled his company's entire existence on revolutionary innovations. And amazingly, it all started with a single vacation. Fresh out of engineering school in 1900, André takes a trip to Poland. While there, he notices a carpenter using wooden gears carved in this very unique V-shaped fishbone pattern. Now, as an engineer, André realized these double helical gears were way quieter and vastly more efficient than your standard straight-cut steel gears. He immediately bought the patent for a nominal sum, headed back to France, and set up a factory to manufacture these gears out of steel. And that very shape, the double chevron, became the permanent, iconic logo of his company. It literally funded his entire entry into the automotive world.
So André basically brings American-style mass production to Europe. In 1919, he launches the Type A. This is the first European car produced on a moving assembly line. By 1925, he's building the Type B12, which is Europe's first car with an all-steel body and four-wheel brakes, and the growth is explosive. By 1929, Citroën had surged past massive rivals like Renault and Peugeot to become the absolute largest vehicle manufacturer in all of Europe. But there's a fatal flaw in our protagonist's strategy here. His hyper-aggressive expansion was dangerously funded by short-term bank debt. And as the Roaring '20s came crashing to a close, a very dark and devastating financial storm was brewing across the Atlantic that would threaten to wipe Citroën entirely off the map.
Section 2. The Great Financial Gamble. When the Great Depression hit Europe, it hit hard. Citroën sales plummeted from 100,000 units in 1929 down to just 70,000 the very next year. André realized that to survive this, playing it safe with conservative, incremental updates just wasn't going to cut it. So what does he do? He bets the entire company on one revolutionary, ridiculously futuristic vehicle, the Traction Avant. To put this in perspective, while his traditional competitors were still building these cheap, rear-wheel drive cars out of wood and steel composites, Citroën pioneered front-wheel drive, independent suspension, hydraulic brakes, and a monocoque unibody steel shell. It was a technological marvel. But to actually build this unibody shell, they desperately needed massive, highly expensive American-made Budd steel presses.
And this right here is where the gamble turns into an absolute nightmare. Right at the exact moment Citroën needed specialized American steel sheets to feed those massive new presses, the French government suddenly slapped a massive 30% import tariff on them. Just like that, manufacturing costs skyrocketed overnight.
Meanwhile, under an impossibly tight 18-month development cycle, a revolutionary automatic transmission that was designed for the car by Dimitri Sensal de Laval, well, it disastrously failed. It just kept overheating. So they had to hastily redesign a standard manual gearbox at the last second. The delays and the retooling costs were just bleeding the company completely dry.
By December 1934, the music finally stopped. Citroën's primary creditors suffered its own liquidity crisis and abruptly cut off their credit line. André Citroën was forced into a devastating, humiliating bankruptcy, buried under a staggering 425 million francs of debt. It was the tragic climax of a visionary's entire life's work. Ultimately, the French government had to step in, and the Michelin Tire Company, who was Citroën's main creditor at the time, took over the business. And this brings us to the heartbreaking, dramatic irony of the whole story. André Citroën, stripped of his company and his life's work, fell seriously ill and died just a few months later in July of 1935. He never lived to see the Traction Avant become an absolute sensation. The very car that bankrupted him went on to become a massive, legendary success that carried the company through the next 2 decades and ultimately saved the brand entirely.
Section 3. Goddesses and Flying Carpets.
But here's the amazing part. The spirit of André Citroën definitely didn't die with him. His absolute penchant for radical innovation became the very DNA of the company as they entered the post-World War II golden era. They started by trying to mobilize the masses. The design brief for the now legendary 2CV was simple, yet kind of poetic. 4 wheels under an umbrella. It was designed specifically to motorize rural France, and the suspension system on this thing was so incredibly soft that a farmer could literally drive across a deeply plowed field carrying a basket of eggs on the passenger seat without breaking a single one. It was unpretentious, robust freedom.
But obviously they didn't just stop at economy cars. In 1955, they completely shocked the world with the DS. I mean, it literally looked like a spaceship landed on the road, featuring this wild, self-leveling hydropneumatic suspension that made the car ride like a flying carpet. Seriously, nothing else rode like it. Later, in 1970, they brought that exact same hydropneumatic comfort to everyday families with the GS. And then, there was the absolute pinnacle of their ambition, the 1970 SM.
Take a moment to marvel at the SM, dubbed the Concorde of the road. This thing was an architectural sculpture on wheels, brilliantly designed by Robert Opron. Get this, Citroën actually went out and bought the Italian sports car maker Maserati just so they could put a high-performance V6 engine into this grand tour. With its hidden, swiveling glass headlights that turn with the steering wheel and a completely unheard-of 0.33 drag coefficient, it could silently cruise at nearly 230 kilometers per hour. The SM really represented a deeply optimistic era when France truly believed the sky was the limit, when automotive technology was viewed as poetry in motion.
Section 4. The Second Collapse. Now, history, as they say, has a nasty habit of repeating itself, and technological arrogance always has a price. The 1970s brought a very harsh reality check to the dreamers in Paris. Because while they were busy building all these high-end technological masterpieces, they basically ignored the fundamentals of running a business. Look at this perfect storm of disasters. For 15 years, they completely missed out on the highly profitable mid-size car market. Then the 1973 oil crisis hit out of nowhere, instantly tanking the sales of their gas-guzzling luxury SM. Combine all that with the massive, failed R&D costs for a totally doomed rotary engine program, and by 1974, Citroën was staring down a staggering 1 billion franc deficit. Michelin wanted out, and Citroën was bankrupt again.
So what happens next? Well, the French government, absolutely terrified of the massive job losses that would follow a total collapse, steps in and brokers a rescue. Michelin essentially transfers control of Citroën to their longtime rival, Peugeot. By 1976, Peugeot had acquired nearly 90% of the company, officially creating the PSA holding company. Maserati was sold off, the rotary engine project was completely scrapped, and Citroën permanently lost its independence as a standalone company. But, and this is crucial, it did not lose its life.
Section 5. A Legacy of Courage. So how does a company that has experienced such extreme, meteoric highs and such devastating bankrupting lows shape its identity today? They do it by recognizing that their incredible, chaotic story of survival is actually their greatest asset. Over a century of incredible volatility, through every single financial disaster, the quirky, brilliant DNA of the brand somehow survived. And that resilience ultimately led them right up to 2021, when the PSA Group merged with Fiat Chrysler to form Stellantis, making Citroën a core brand within the world's 4th largest automaker.
Think about that. They survived literally everything the 20th century could throw at them. And they aren't just sitting around resting on their heritage either. Today, they're actively reinventing themselves through accessible electrification. They're out there launching really quirky, out-of-the-box vehicles like the Ami, this tiny electric quadricycle, and the incredibly affordable EC3. They're still building wonderfully strange cars like the C5X, which stubbornly refuses to be categorized, essentially blending a sedan, a crossover, and a station wagon all into one vehicle. It just goes to show that true automotive heritage isn't just about wistful nostalgia. It's the bedrock for modern reinvention.
Which really leaves us with this final, profound thought to chew on. From invisibly sabotaging Nazi trucks to putting hydropneumatic spaceships on the highway, Citroen's true legacy is proving that actual progress requires immense, sometimes reckless, courage. In a modern world that is so often driven purely by algorithms, focus groups, and safe, cost-efficient choices, this entire story begs a question we should probably all be asking ourselves today. Can technology still move us, emotionally? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.